Hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Bawa, and my number ID is 1551751, and today I would like to discuss about the NHS or National Health Service. But before we discuss about the NHS, I would like to express my solidarity and condolences to everyone who's already been affected by this coronavirus. And also, I would like to express my gratitude to all of healthcare workers, especially those who are working in frontline services and putting their life at risk so we all could be safe. So why we are talking about the NHS today? Because I believe that this pandemic today show us that we as a society need healthcare as a human rights rather seen it as a privileged goods. And the NHS is one of many available options for path toward the universal healthcare system. So how the NHS works? The National Health Service is a universal healthcare system provided to all citizens of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So basically, when people go to the hospital, either because they are have an accident, they need a primary care, or they even needed a surgery, the people would not be charged by the hospital. Or rather, the government would cover all of their costs. So how the government could cover all of that costs? They could do that because the government act as your medical insurance and provided it for all people, or usually called as a single payer system. In this case, NHS is primarily funded throughout a general taxation and a small amount national insurance. And one thing about the NHS that it is actually publicly owned. So all the hospitals, doctors and nurses is actually state-owned and state-employed. So how the NHS was born? Throughout the Second World War, the British government didn't only see the defeat of the Nazi as the goal for the end of the war, but also how the end of the war became the start of a new kind of society, a fairer society in Britain. And so Beveridge report was published. It famously stated that there are 5 giants to the road of the reconstruction, which is 1. A disease, a squalor, ignorance, and idleness. This report is seen as a turning page of the creation of welfare state in Britain. And so, on 5 July 1948, the NHS was born. Not without its controversy, not only seen as an expensive project because Britain already been bankrupted by the war, but also the doctors, the key component of this NHS, had been the number one opposition to the creation of the NHS itself. But Aneurin Bevan, or Nye Bevan, the Minister of Health and the architect of the creation of the NHS, were firm to his commitment, and eventually NHS was born. So to give you clear views about how huge the NHS, I'll give you some fact and stat about the NHS. First of all, NHS expenditure as 2019 was £129.6 billion, or roughly equal 380 trillion Indonesian rupiah. Secondly, NHS has roughly 1.6 million employees UK-wide, which made it NHS as the 5th largest employer in the world, only behind US Defense Department, China People's Liberation Army, Walmart, and McDonald's worldwide. NHS also had 160,000 doctors, 360,000 nurses and midwives, which all considered as a state employees. So now the question is, how good is the NHS? As you could see, NHS has its own strengths and its weaknesses. The study from the Institute for Physical Studies shows the NHS main weaknesses compared to other OECD countries is healthcare outcomes, when UK slightly perform less well on the overall rate of successful medical care that could save life. It appears because UK markedly have fewer doctors and nurses relative to the size of its population, and also fewer hospital beds and necessary medical equipment such as CT scanner and MRI machine. In the opposite, NHS has all its own strength, which is health equity, where it does better at protecting people from heavy financial costs and performing well in managing certain long-term illnesses. NHS also relatively efficient than other healthcare systems in the world, with lower healthcare spending per capita than Japan, France, Australia, Canada, Germany, and USA. As any other healthcare system, the NHS also facing challenges in its operation. First of all, NHS is highly politicized. Because it's controlled by the government, naturally the NHS would be likely to be politicized. Sometimes it's like watching ping pong by one politician to another politician, when the NHS has been played over and over again. Secondly, it's usually underfunded by the government, with much of its consequences down to its services. So, for example, long waiting times at A&E, long waiting times at primary care, diagnosis and treatment. And another consequences is a lack of a necessary machine and hospital bed. And also there's another challenges, which is a lack of medical staff, especially with Brexit happen, and suddenly nearly a third of the NHS staff are European. It will be huge challenges for the NHS to cope with those medical staff. The next challenging is aging population, higher cases of chronic disease, such as cancer and cardiovascular disease, that will put extra pressure into the NHS services. But despite these challenges, NHS remains a popular institution among British people. As one survey shows, nearly half of British people put the NHS as a thing that makes them most proud to be British. As a lot of things could make a nation proud, such as its history, a cultural achievement, revolution industry, scientific and technological advancement, television and musical influence, the British people put its healthcare system ahead all of them. Another thing that could show how British people love the NHS is, as you could see, at the from 2012 London Olympics opening, where they dedicated special segment to celebrating the NHS. They had volunteers dressed up as a nurse and children jumping up on the bed. So perhaps NHS isn't just their healthcare system, but also show us its values they actually stands for. Thank you so much.